Once again, we're looking at the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I'm looking at. I used to read Frankenstein with the class as an example of the Gothic novel, and illustrating one of the themes that runs throughout the texts that are on the syllabus this semester, namely themes of alienation and of the problems, it's not there in Paradise Lost, but thereafter, that a scientific outlook which is there to benefit humanity, in many ways does benefit humanity, nonetheless poses for humanity, because technology is not a neutral thing. I heard in Christian circles, I heard it for years, I heard it was the orthodox way of thinking about it, that the world of technology was a matter of neutrality. It just depends on how you used it. And I don't think it's true, and I never thought it was true, but I knew it was meant by it, because, you can use something as a weapon, or you can use it to defend yourself. I'm not thinking of a gun here in particular, but you can use a shovel to kill somebody. You can use a shovel to dig the grave for the body that you hit with a shovel. Yeah, no, for digging the ground, breaking it up to plant crops. So the shovel's neutral in that sense. I'm thinking more of something along the lines of technology used for, so for example, a cell phone. It's a great thing to be able to have a cell phone and give it to a child so that you can immediately access your children or your loved ones, especially if they go on a long journey to, let's say, fly overseas or something. They can send you a text, let you know I landed. Isn't that great? That immediacy. But with the technology that allows that sort of distance, airplanes, high speed, all manner of things, and the high speed internet that will connect you, it allows people to go away to begin with. Right? In centuries past, people did not go on extended sea voyages, or let alone flights across the globe, and your loved ones would have stayed in close proximity to you. So the technology that allows you to move away from your relations also allows you to connect to them, and we can praise it on both sides, but what you've lost is a sense of human contact. And now it's mediated through technology. So it solves the problem of, if it is a problem, of being connected to your family. And it's allowed people to move away from their families and so forth to some degree. You build out roads, you build out railroads, you build airplanes, whatever that allows you to move away. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? It's a bit of both, but it's not neutral. That one thing is not neutral. It changes the world in many ways, and some of the ways in which it changes are not foreseen when the devices are invented. It brings the world under the dominion of mankind, but at the cost of something of the human race before the technology existed. And one of them is, again, distance from people who know you best and love you best. And are you better off for it or worse off for it? I'm not answering the question. I'm saying that the modern scientific age makes the world smaller so we can talk about a global village. At the same time, it can make it smaller in the sense that this video can be watched on the other side of the world. If I was simulcast, it could be instantaneous. But would that actually be bringing people closer together? In one sense, clearly. In another sense, no. And it has all sorts of other unintended consequences. But it's not a neutral thing. And in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, just like in Frankenstein, the novel, it is portraying the scientist as wrestling with the problems of modern science, and not doing so in a neutral fashion. And to some degree, the power that is unleashed by the technical implements or the medical technology creates a world that is probably a little bit out of control. It's under his control, and yet, because he didn't anticipate other things, it's out of his control. So in Frankenstein, which we're not going to read because I read it in other classes, if you continue on with English, Dr. Frankenstein creates a human being out of dead bodies. He stitches them together. He creates a giant being, and through what is called galvanism or electricity, he brings that being to light. So it's an 8-foot superhuman being, and not evil in any way, by the way, when he's created. The evil arises when the scientist is horrified by what he creates. As soon as it comes to life, he's like, what have I done? Only then, at that point. And he's been doing it secretly because he's transgressed certain ethical boundaries. Well, he's been digging up bodies. Well, they're dead, though. But he's been digging up bodies, and he's been doing his work in secret at night, and he believes that he's doing it for human progress further, or he thinks he's a humanitarian. But when he sees the beast in front of him, he suddenly, as if he hadn't imagined what that would look like and what it would entail, it suddenly dawns on him, oh my, what have I done? And the beast that we call the monster is hurt by what happened. Like his creator turns his back on him. He runs away. And everyone's horrified by him, in fact. His appearance is terrifying. People run shrieking. He's 8 foot, and he's got stitches across him, and he's faster than everyone else, and he's highly intelligent, etc. That doesn't matter. And though he's like a child in his innocence, he learns very quickly and starts to think of himself in terms of paradise lost. And imagine if the creator of humanity had treated his creation like you're creating me. And then an analogy comes up. But I'm not looking at that, but I'm just saying this is a common narrative in the post-scientific era. The consequences of science, and it looks at it from both sides, good and evil. In this case, it's going to present a hero, at least a hero from the common perspective of the modern age, which is a scientist. Scientists are heroes because they push out the boundaries of knowledge. And by gaining greater knowledge of the world, they suggest, first of all, we can understand the world better, but also that we can deliver on the knowledge gained to improve the state of humanity. So in that sense, they're like explorers. And in Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, the scientist, is actually compared to another man by the name of Walton, who is an explorer. And they're seen as doing a similar sort of thing. They're doing the Star Trek, boldly going where no man has gone before type thing, right? They're going, extending, just like in the United States, the idea of the West, and you're moving the West until there's no more West, and you've hit the California, and now what do? Well, maybe we go undersea, or we can go into outer space. But that same extent, the idea of extending the boundaries of humanity everywhere as a way of maybe exercising the dominion mandate. If you think about it back in Genesis 1:28, to be fruitful, multiply, fill, and subdue the earth, bring it under dominion. But now the dominion is extended not only to the whole globe, but into outer space or under the sea. Those are novels of the 19th century. Did you read Jules Verne, this 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or First Men in the Moon, the sort of exploratory novels? These are when the earth has been completely mapped. We haven't quite got there yet, but we'll come to Heart of Darkness, in which he'll talk about Africa not yet having been completely mapped. There's the center of Africa, where the Congo is a jungle, so it's very difficult to go there. And so there's a white patch in the middle of Africa where nobody has yet, no European, no scientist has yet gone. There might be people there, but they're not part of the project of expanding human knowledge. In the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we have a scientist who's a doctor, is a representative of the, from a biblical perspective, one of the Levites, one of the Levitical professions, not just the priests. Lawyers are part of the Levitical professions, so are doctors, so are teachers for that matter. These are historically Levitical professions, and for that reason they wear robes in public. You know, I go around like some sort of tropical bird once a year when I do processions wearing these scarlet robes and so forth. But these are sort of priestly vestments. The clergy wear them, academics wear them, the justices of the peace wear them, and doctors wear them. They have a big white lab coat. And the whiteness has certain connotations as well, the lab coat. It's a priesthood of sorts, right? And you get a title with it, doctor, which means teacher, and there's a reverence that goes with that as well. And now, one of the things that I'm not going to trace on the course, but just put it way in the back of your mind, is how do the Levitical professions, the ones that wear the robes, change over the course of the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th centuries and into the 21st. They were once all Christians. Pretty much, more or less. All. As the 20th century progresses, they become increasingly less Christian in numbers and in convictions. They start doing things in the name of health that would contradict any, I would say, common sense understanding of what health is. So abortion, killing is not health care. Euthanasia is not health care. Killing can't be health care. Without, or can it? Maybe it can, because we do include it under that. So actually the fact that we do that is going to introduce another thought, and I'm going to get to it in a second. But we see a progressive secularization and de-Christianization of the Levitical professions. The professions remain. The structures, I don't want to say the credibility, the social standing of those in those professions is high and remains high until very recently, when academics start destroying their own profession and the law starts to lose its credibility, and so does the medical profession, and so on and so on. And why is that? Well, the easy Christian answer would be is because they become less Christian, which I actually think is a correct answer. But I think we can look at it a little bit more closely. What is it about Christianity that will give the Levitical professions not just their credibility, but their efficacy? What makes them work? And it's largely because they have clear boundaries and definitions. They understand the difference between life and death, and good and evil, right and wrong, virtuous and unethical behavior. Those are all clearly defined. And so will the structures that Scripture will speak of in terms of social structures. The family will be acknowledged by everybody as the basic building block of all society. The first form of human government is a family. That will reign all the way up till the 1960s, actually. Doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum, you'll say that a family is this. A father and a mother and children, that's what a family is. That also starts. So my point of this is definitions are very set and fixed and clear and unequivocal. Right? I don't think I'm saying anything that anyone would question. However, come the 18th century, and especially the 19th, and even more so the 20th century, and let's not even talk about the contemporary, because I think there's an acceleration of the same problem. We get a redefinition of good and evil, and right and wrong, and life and death, and heroism. And let me just stop on the fourth of those, the heroism, and just look at it from a literary perspective, because this is a class in literature. Go back to what we did last semester, those of you who were with me, and those of you who weren't, I'm going to catch up and push into this in the more contemporary framework. But if you look at the heroes from last semester in this course, or to include everybody in the Bible, how are the heroes of Scripture portrayed? Are they good guys? Sure.
Yes, but flawed.
Always. So who's one of the greatest heroes of Scripture, if you want to call them heroes? Not that they're called that. David, sure. Or Moses, or Jacob, whatever. Say those three guys. David is a murderer and an adulterer who incites a civil war by the way he treats his wife and his family. Moses murders a man and then runs off. Right? That's how he begins his career. As for Jacob, well, he's a serial liar, the shifty guy. He doesn't stop lying. He's a trickster. And yet he's one of the great heroes of the faith. So that portrait of heroism is clear there, and yet they're flawed heroes. Likewise, look at the material, the heroes that have been on this course. Let's look at the Greek epic. We have Achilles on the one hand, we have Odysseus. We did the Odyssey. So let's look at Odysseus. What's Odysseus like? He's clearly the hero. He's a demigod, right? What does he do? And how does he act? Sure.
He's prideful and boasts Cyclops.
Yeah, that brings him down, and we don't like that very much, for sure. But that doesn't seem to bother Homer too much, because Athena is also a boaster and a liar, and he's a lot like her. His problem is actually he reveals his identity, which is a funny old thing to bring him down. No, but the point is he's a liar. He's a deceiver. He's a trickster. He gets things done, and he's resilient. We admire his resilience, but he's not a perfect, let's say, the good guy with the white hat. He's got his flaws. Aeneas even more so, right? Not very admirable. You read Aeneas and you think, boy, is this the hero? I'm not sure I like him even. Like, he does some great things. He takes his father out from the flames of Troy, carries him, and undergoes great suffering and so forth. But he leaves his wife behind. Not really his fault, but she's lost in the process. And he does so unwillingly, basically. He's encouraged to leave. He doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay. But he goes. He's told to go. He does go. He ends up in Carthage, falls in love with a woman named Dido, and he wants to stay with her. Shacks up with her. Right? And that's despite the fact that he's been told that he has a great charge on his life, namely to found the Roman Empire, and he's willing to stay there. And the gods come in and say, you've got to get going here because you've been told to do this. And he, like a good Roman soldier, obeys, says, okay. That's what makes him heroic. He's obedient. But he's not an admirable character, more admirable than anyone else. So if you got to the second half of the Aeneid, he squares off against Turnus. Turnus actually seems more likable, admirable, virtuous. Right? So my point here is simply to say that the heroes of Western literature are very much flawed, very realistic. right? So what makes them heroic, though? There's a standard of goodness or virtue whereby we measure them. And they achieve great things, despite their flaws. Or they do this and they still have their flaws, but the flaws are not ignored. We don't say, here are the good guys, they're all good, and here are the bad guys, they're all bad. Like, it's not supervillain versus superhero. The black and white portrait. Correct? I just want to make sure you're with me on this. Because this is what you will hear in portraits these days. Because if you want to think about, and I realize I'm doing a digression before I even get to the book here, but I'm setting the stage and saying why this book is important. In the cowboy films, you ever watch cowboy old westerns? Anyone like westerns? Ever watch the old westerns? The good guys with the white hats, and the bad guys with the black hats and all that. And the good guys are really good. Like Disney good. No flaws good. Right? And the bad guys are snarling. Yeah. And they are obviously bad. They're like Scar in The Lion King, right? He's a nasty. He's usually got a British accent, whatever, but he's darker. And you just see him and I think I know who the bad guy is, because it's like, hello, the lights are flashing, this is bad. And the good guy, likewise, very, very clear, distinct, and without any, very surface. There's no depth, there's no flaws in the good characters, and there are no virtues in the bad characters. It's just very black and white. That's very much of a 20th century view. You'll notice in recent cowboy fictions, breaking the boundaries of the genre, guess what? The heroes have their flaws. And equally true, the villains have their virtues. And in fact, when you look at the two, what is suggested is that actually they're pretty much the same. If you watch The Dark Knight, Batman, The Dark Knight, the Joker says to Batman that we're the same, basically. This is why the Joker likes Batman. We're the same guy. And Batman's really angry about this. He says, we're nothing alike. And he says, oh, yes, we are. And he says, well, there's things that I won't do. And you have no ethics at all. And he says, well, that one thing that you won't do, I'm going to make you do it. Which he then does. Right? He makes him do the things that he says, I've got a principle. And I think, well, I'm going to make you break it just to show you. And he does do it. Why does he do it? You remember the movie? No. Okay. We'll go watch it. He says, I'm going to make you do it to show, and he does do it because he wants to defeat his enemy and save the city. So the ends justify the means. Right? The ends justify the means. He's a pragmatist. And at the end of the day, he doesn't care whether he has to surveil all of society and put it under, basically treat people like objects and not care about the consequences, as long as he can defeat his enemy. And Joker says, that's exactly what I do. I have no ethics at all, and neither do you. And he's happy about this, because he's cuckoo. Right? And just see somebody that's equally unprincipled like him. He's called the Dark Knight. So the knights we think of as good guys, but Batman's a very bad guy. Other than he has certain principles, like he won't shoot or something like that, sort of bizarre. Use all sorts of other weapons will blow you up, but he's going to punch you with his fists. Okay, whatever. It's really strange. Anyway, so he has principles, but he'll break his own rules. What's that hero like then? Does he have an ethical standard that he believes in, seeks to attain, and fails to attain? Or does he reject all means and standards in order to get the outcome that he wants? I think it's pretty clear from what I've just said. It's the latter, right? The ends justify the means, and that's what heroism becomes. That's what Dr. Jekyll and Hyde is showing us, how the good characters are actually almost indifferent to the bad characters. they no longer have a fixed moral standard that they seek to attain to, and by which we, the audience, will measure them. It's just not there. We expect it to be there because we associate with the Levitical professions like doctors, medical professions, lawyers, both of which appear in the story, by the way. The story begins with a Sunday scroll with Mr. Utterson, who's a prominent London lawyer, and his kinsman, Mr. Enfield, and they're talking about a doctor, and there's an expectation, since both of them are gentlemen, that they're going to act in an ethically uncompromised fashion, right? That's the expectation. So it's like, oh, I'm marrying a doctor, or I got admitted to med school, and all the parents are like, hooray, whoa, isn't that wonderful? I have a doctor's title, but all people care about now is that I'm on YouTube, so which is a bizarre sort of thing, but never mind. It shows how much the standard of titles matter these days, as it speaks to what I said about the degrading of the professions. But the expectation for us is set there already. We think Dr. Jekyll will be a civilized gentleman and will act according to certain unimpeachable standards. But when we look at it, we find that we have a man who is, as the picture portrays, Dr. Jekyll in this way, and yet he's the same guy, Mr. Hyde. This is the same guy. How is it possible for a Victorian gentleman regarded by the whole world to be the standard of the gentleman of Victorian Britain and at the same time do the depraved, immoral actions of Mr. Hyde? How is it even possible for that man to do that sort of thing? Does Dr. Jekyll and the scientific profession have a standard of virtue that we would have seen in the ancient world, in the Greeks and the Romans, and in the Christian era? Or has he moved away from moral standards altogether, and it's all about using technology for advancing human knowledge and human power at the expense of moral considerations? It's one of the great themes of the course, because that's what happens. And in the end, we get what C.S. Lewis will call the abolition of man. Have you read this book yet? I recommend it for summer reading. Let me put it on the board for you. Now, what do I mean by the abolition of man? I mean, or what C.S. Lewis means, never mind what I mean. He means the thing about human nature that makes us human, distinctively human, and the thing that is at the center of education, because this is a book about education. He's studying a textbook written to high school students in the UK, sixth form, and talking about how the perspective there taken suggests that moral considerations are subjective and are therefore not the true object of real education. Because real education is concerned with facts and truth and not with subjective feelings. Like I feel like David is a great hero. And somebody says, well, I feel like he's a villain. You'll say, well, who's going to arbitrate between feelings? This depends on your perspective. If you're on the side of, if you're a Hittite, you think David's a great villain. If you're somebody whose father has cheated on your mother and has broken up the family, maybe you're actually on Uriah's side and think that David's a great villain for his actions. You probably would. In both cases, though, we're missing the point of what is being taught in Scripture, namely that there's a standard of conduct that David is being held to, namely that of God's own character, and he falls short of it and repents of his actions and by faith trusts in God for his deliverance of his sins. That's what we hold to be heroic. It's not his greatness per se, although there's a bit of that. It's how he responds to his failures. That's the story of Paradise Lost as well, by the way, which began the first semester, or the first text on the course. Right? Jesus is the hero. So is Adam. Adam loses paradise. How is he heroic? He repents. That's called heroic. It's not in the pagan world, but it is in the Christian world. But the abolition of man suggests that moral considerations are irrelevant to human nature. And Lewis calls that the Tao. He says that the moral nature of mankind stops being a consideration in the Western world. And he's very alarmed by it. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is an illustration of a man without a chest. He calls it a chest. He means the moral nature of the man. Dr. Jekyll has no moral nature. He has the social standing of a good man, because we want to think that doctors are good. And historically they would have been, and today they still might be, but there's a greater and greater sense that those that wear the Levitical robes have departed from the Torah as their guideline and determination of what good and evil are. And so we'll start to get the emergence of a new type of hero, which I've not yet discussed yet, and I'm going to put it up here on the board again. And it's called a Byronic hero. And if you want to know what a Byronic hero is, we'll look at Batman. A Byronic hero is a man ostracized by society who's nonetheless heroic in his actions, does good things. But he's hated. He's an outsider. He's a scapegoat for certain things. He's vilified. And the people who vilify him, the authorities, are often presented as being oppressive, tyrannical, inhuman. But they're on the good guy's side. This is how the Enlightenment conceives it. They conceive it in terms of power and authority and where you lie in relation to that. And the heroes are the outsiders, the underdogs, the bad guys, often the orphans, often the criminals. Yes, sir?
Are there any examples of Byronic hero
Within the Bible, no. No, not one. Because the Byronic hero is not held to a standard of heroism that he fails to meet. It's that he mixes what society calls evil with what society calls good. He mixes those. And the only thing that makes him a sort of a villain is the fact that the leaders in society don't recognize him. So he's a rebel. But one man's rebel or one man's terrorist is the next man's freedom fighter. And so it's just where you lay in relation to authority. That's what determines your heroism. That's it. Not a standard of good and evil anymore, but are you against the establishment or are you with it? If you're with the establishment, then you are a good guy from the social vantage point. But from the fictional vantage point, it's the outsider that's going to rescue society because they work outside the rules and get the right outcomes. They ignore good and evil. The ends justify the means. And there, the villain and the hero are the same character, effectively. Yes?
When you say that the Byronic hero ignores good and evil, you mean the objective good and evil?
Yes.
But
Everyone still uses the terms good and evil. They still use those terms and say he's a bad guy. But the vantage point of the author suggests that the one that's being labeled the bad guy is actually the hero.
You're saying that this type does not exist in the Bible?
It does not.
And what
Do you think of a counterexample? I mean, maybe you can think of some. Who's heroic? Gideon.
Yeah. I mean, Gideon, initially he's cowardly.
He is cowardly.
Right?
Yes.
Eventually he trusts in the Lord after he's reassured multiple times, and he fights and wins. And you could even say that he has an aspect of humility when he refuses the people's plea for him to rule over them, and his son.
How is that a Byronic hero, though? Is his cowardice being praised?
No.
No.
But so you're saying that the social aspect, like the society has to praise them.
What makes Gideon heroic is not his flaws any more than they are David or they are
So you're saying
Moses.
what makes a Byronic hero heroic is that.
It's just social standing. That's it.
So what the society, the fictitious society labels as bad,
Is actually good.
ironically makes him good.
Yes.
Is that where the ironic?
Byronic, not ironic. It's named after Lord Byron, who was a very interesting bad guy. Bit of a rock star in his day. Allegedly, we had countless affairs, but also allegedly an incestuous affair with his half-sister, Augusta Lee, which he did nothing to try and distance himself from. In fact, he wrote about it in his works repeatedly, suggesting that it was, because everyone, when they're reading his stories, thinks that he's writing about himself. Like he's in all of his novels. And everyone says, this is a really bad guy, look at what he does. And yet you can see it from his point of view. It's actually the women throwing themselves at him and so on and so forth. It's not his fault. And we sort of like that rascally Lord Byron. You know, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Yes?
What would the difference be between a Byronic hero and an anti-hero?
What is an anti-hero?
From what I understand, it's someone who is seen to be on like the negative side, but has like heroic tendencies. So kind of similar to a Byronic hero. I'm not sure if I have the right definition.
I'm not sure either exactly what an anti-hero is. I do know what a Byronic hero is.
You know Deadpool? The character?
I've never seen it, but yes.
So that
Yeah.
would be an anti-hero.
That's an anti-hero.
Somebody that
Because
would-
he's very bad, right? He's not even, there's no...
If you look at him, nobody would support him as a hero, but at the end he ends up doing like...
Right. But there's no, he's not a liminal figure. There's no boundaries there. He's just, he's only bad. Like he swears, and that's my understanding. Like, yeah. I guess that's the anti-hero. But then he does the good thing in the end.
Yeah, like, I guess the anti-hero at the end ends up being pushed towards doing that because nobody else ends up doing it.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of
He falls into it almost by accident.
Like I have to do it because nobody else is doing it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But if it was up to them, they would not be doing it. That's kind of.
Whereas a Byronic hero seems to acknowledge that there is some sort of a goodness there. He just thinks that society is so corrupted that it can't do the thing that it most prizes, and he can't achieve that outcome either if he follows the rules. So he breaks the rules. But he still acknowledges there's a sort of goodness, but then it doesn't fit with his character profile. His character is irrelevant. It's the ends that justify the means. That's the Byronic hero. Whereas the anti-hero sounds like he just represents everything bad, and then somehow he accidentally does a good thing, and we're like, hey, and he's like, what just happened there? Okay, sure, fair enough. Obviously, there's none in Scripture. Yes?
Is Robin Hood a Byronic hero?
No, he's not. I don't think he is. But you could see why he might be, because he's the outlaw. Prophets are always, and he's more of a prophetic figure. Somebody outside the law. The prophets are outside civilized boundaries. Like in the age when civilization starts to fall, the prophets come up. There's almost no such thing as an establishment prophet. They're almost always against the establishment because the establishment is so corrupt that it needs somebody to call them back to repent from the wilderness. And Robin Hood is a figure of law and order who's outside the law and order, because the law and order totally misrepresent themselves. It's totally corrupt. So I think they reinforce the idea of the law, and he upholds the law even though he's against the law, if you know what I mean, right? I don't think that the Dark Knight does that. He never sees a good and tries to obtain it even. He will do everything wrong. I mean, I can see why people would think that he is, and that's probably why he becomes popular.
Robin Hood?
Yeah, Robin Hood.
What type would you say he is? If not Byronic.
I think he's more like a prophet. He's not saying things, but he's doing things. He's upholding justice. He's giving to the poor. He's doing social justice, if you will. Right? He is not. He's not breaking all the rules of engagement. Right? He doesn't. He seems to have a code. It's just the code only operates now in the wilderness, rather, or in the forest, whereas in civilized society, it's totally corrupt, and nobody, even though they have the law, the sheriff of Nottingham's on their side, the sheriff's a very bad man. Right? Anyway, enough of that. Enough generalization. I've talked for 40 minutes.